I'm Karima Brown. It's Sunday morning and it's time for The Fix. Today, we bring you the real human costs of lives lost as a result of state and corporate capture by greed and looting of state coffers by our political elite. And in the hot seat is Deputy Finance Minister Mondli Gungubele, who together with the entire board of the PIC, which he chairs, resigned en masse amid allegations of corrupt deals and wrongdoing. Lastly, we take a look at our weekend newspapers to see what's making headlines this week and why. The Fix starts now. This is The Fix, where every Sunday, without fear or favour, we question the big hitters. We look ahead and tell you what matters, how it affects you, and why you should care. Today I'm flying solo. My co-anchor Peter Bruce will join us next week. Many of us have become desensitized as the Zondo Commission of Inquiry reveals just how deep the rot of state and corporate capture runs, and the billions that have been stolen from taxpayers to line the pockets of our political elite. But few have focused on the human costs and the lives lost as a result of the consequence of this horror. This morning, we look at the lives of the late Vernie Peterson, the National Commissioner of Prisons, who said no to Bosasa's corruption. We also look at how 4-year-old Sikolo Slabandza and a South African toddler who was illegally detained under a contract Bosasa should never have received, died and now lies buried in an unmarked grave. For this, I'll be joined by Father Michael Weeder. He is the Dean of the St GeorgesCathedral, and also joining me in the studio is Joan van Dyk. She is the health journalist from Bhekisisa Centre for Health Journalism at the Mail and Guardian. Joan, good morning. Thank you so very much. We're waiting for Father Michael Weeder to come up on Skype. But you've written a very heart-rending story about a 4-year-old little boy, South African boy, who was taken to Lindela and who, of course, died there. Take us through how his death is related to Bosasa, the company that we've, of course, heard has been getting billions of rands through bribes and through basically lining the pockets of politicians.
So Home Affairs, Lindela Repatriation Centre technically falls under Home Affairs.
Yeah.
But since about 2003, it's been, Bosasa's got the contract to run that facility, including its clinic.
This is the health clinic? The
health clinic that's supposed to look after the detainees there. And last week at the inquiry, it came to light that some of these the contract that they got to run the clinic, they were never supposed to get
the contract. And the way in which they went about getting this contract, what did they do to get it?
Well, the first contract was a 10-year contract that ran from 2005 until 2015. And the second contract, they then illegally, by bypassing National Treasury's procurement procedures.
Yeah.
They bypassed those by using a business consultant and got the tender again to the value of 500 million rand, even though they were banned from there was a government ban on them providing these health services.
So tell me, what does the health services do at Lindela, and how did this 4-year-old toddler land there, and how did that service fail him? And of course, as we know, Bosasa got that contract illegally.
Well, the health services there aren't doing very much at all.
What exists there physically?
It's unclear what actually exists at this stage. We haven't been able to get hold of the 2015 contract, but what we've been told by Home Affairs is just we were just sent one sentence saying that they require Bosasa to provide a 24-hour sick bay with nurses and medication. And if something serious comes up, they have to refer to an outside government hospital. So that's all we know about what they are required to do currently, but we haven't been able to confirm that that is actually in the contract.
So what happened in the case of this 4-year-old toddler?
Sino and his aunt Irene were taken to Lindela. And upon their arrival, there was no screening at the clinic. You're supposed to screen for things like HIV, TB. Age was definitely not looked at. You're not allowed to have underage people there at
Yeah, so he was there illegally from the beginning.
From the beginning.
And he's also a South African.
Never mind that he's a South African child, and his aunt, Irene, who's Congolese, was legally documented, so there's no reason for her to be there either. The conditions at Lindela are famously very bad, the health conditions, and in the 2 weeks that they were there in the women's ward, not doing very much, little Sino became very ill. He had diarrhea, he had a fever, and when they went to the sick bay that they're supposed to have there, the only nurse that was there refused to help them, refused to even give a panado to break his fever. He was referred out to Leratong Hospital, and unfortunately he had become so ill that there was not much that they could do for him at that stage, and he passed away that night.
Now, the fact that he is buried in an unmarked grave, obviously you were saying that the centre falls under Home Affairs, but the contract was given to Bosasa. So Bosasa is directly responsible for the fact that there was no medical facilities on the premises the night that Sino got sick, and of course that the nurse didn't help him. Did the family approach Bosasa for any reparations? Did they bring a case? What's happening with the situation?
No, the family very much has been in the dark since 2004, and they haven't been able to. They asked hospital staff, they asked staff at Lindela. They were just refused any information, and this is something that they believe it's linked to nothing more than their Congolese accents. So they have just been faced closed doors wherever they...
And the fact that Sino was South African, his mom was at work, he was with his aunt, how does Home Affairs explain the fact that they arrested a South African child, underage child, and put him into a facility that Bosasa run and that they got illegally? They didn't staff the place with a health clinic, and this little boy died. Surely they can be held liable.
They have, we've been reporting on the health conditions at Lindela for quite a while, and they have denied every allegation that we've put to them. So there's no, to date, even for the story we did last week, there's been no real response from them.
So Home Affairs is basically just ignoring you?
Yes, that's a good
and of course you realized that Bosasa wasn't able to get this contract. Was this a surprise to you, because you've been focusing on this facility for a while? What is Bosasa's exact involvement with the facility there, and how did they manage to actually bypass the Treasury officials by using the consultant? Because we see that is practically their MO. They use middle people so that there's plausible deniability, if you like.
It wasn't a surprise when we found out that they'd used some other way to get the contract again, because we've been trying to get hold of that contract for ages, and it's just been impossible. And it's not only us; it's Lawyers for Human Rights, it's the Human Rights Commission, it's very civil society groups that are working at the centre.
And who's meant to give you that contract? Who's meant to show you this is the contract that Bosasa got, this is what they were supposed to provide, and then you can obviously check it against what actually happened?
Well, we've requested it from Home Affairs. Lawyers for Human Rights has put a PIA request in, which has taken more than a year and a half and still with no results. Yes, so we haven't put in a PIA request ourselves, but it's failed from other organisations.
Tell me, as far as you know, Joan, is Bosasa still actually running that clinic at Home Affairs? Because there was a call from the Pop Crew Police Union that the Department of Correctional Services, for example, stop its contract with Bosasa as a consequence of the corruption. And hopefully I'm going to be speaking with Father Michael Wieder about this. Vernie Peterson was the head of prisons, and he resisted the Bosasa corruption, and of course was threatened and died and had quite a rough time. But tell me whether they actually still maintaining the property and maintaining the health services. Has any of the departments actually come out and said, since what we've heard at Bosasa, or rather at the Commission of Inquiry into Bosasa, we are no longer going to be doing business with them?
As far as I know, they're still running the clinic. There's no indication that the health conditions there are any better. A report that Doctors Without Borders did still shows allegations of suspicious deaths, beatings by security staff. It's still, it's not going any better there. We haven't heard that they will be stopping the contract. We do know that Home Affairs and the Department of Health met this week, but we don't know what, this past week, we don't know what has come from that meeting. In the past, the Department of Health has, in response to our questions, said they are willing to help, but they nothing much more than that.
Yeah. Now, what is interesting, of course, is that Bosasa started with the correctional services, and they obviously tried really, really hard to get the contract. Now, I know you are a health journalist, and you focus on this small little boy who died at the hands of complete neglect, if you like. But the story of Vernie Peterson is a really important story. He was the head of prisons at the time that Bosasa tried to, in fact, bully the people, or rather bribe them to give the contract. And he stood up, and I've got an article written here by Reverend Michael Wieder, whom we're struggling to get up. But I just want to read out to you what Father Wieder had said about Vernie. He said, Vernie arrived at our door one winter's night in 2009. There were 2 security cars at either end of the short street where we lived. In his sharing, I could feel his abject sense of betrayal. He spoke of how members of the old special branch were now in cahoots with colleagues in his department. He had been threatened with death and was anxious about the well-being of his family. He spoke of the temptation to walk away, but he weighed up his fidelity to the Constitution, along with a history in the struggle trenches against the forces of evil assembling to defeat him. He chose the former, and he suffered the consequences as his courage bridled his fear. Now, he, of course, died on February 27, on February the 27th, 2011. And what is really interesting, Father Michael Wieder writes that there was also a shift in attitude of the usually attentive night nurse. They told me, Shea June, who is Vernie's wife, that he could not call for help needed as the bedside button was not working. His oxygen bottle was empty, and he struggled to breathe. In the early hours of February 27th, he was called back to the hospital, and then they said to her, your husband had taken a bad turn. And once there, June and her sons felt ignored by the doctors when they approached, informed him, and and they just told them, we've intubated him. The other thing, of course, is that Father Michael Wieder says very eloquently, the blame of the death of Vernie Peterson lies at the feet of a compromised bureaucracy headed by greed-driven mandarins who have lost their souls, along with the Heathrow faceless cabals who idolize the golden calf of capital. Agree's testimony has recast the long-dimmed light of suspicion on what has caused his death. I'm hoping that we have the clip of Mr. Agree's. Let's just play it in, and we can listen to how he actually acknowledges that Mr. Vernie Peterson was a problem for them. Let's take a listen.
Say that the subject matter of the meeting was an attempt to find a solution to Mr. Peterson's refusal to communicate with Bosasa.
Correct.
What happened?
Well, it was agreed that they, which included Mr. Ngale, who was the regional commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services, would be paid R1 million per month.
Regional Commissioner of Department of Correctional Services in Gauteng?
No, in KZN.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
When you say it was agreed that they, including Mr. Ngale, would be paid R1 million per month, what is the detail? Was that for all, some? Who are the they?
That was for the team.
In terms of the agreement reached at that meeting, what were the 2 people going to do in order to, what were they going to do for Bosasa? Because the National Commissioner was Mr. Peterson, and he wanted to have nothing to do with Bosasa. What were they going to do? He was the top man, isn't it?
That is correct. Chair, and once more, it is my thinking, from what I heard in the meeting, was that they would put undue pressure on the department and on Vernie Peterson through the associations with Pop Crew and with the unions and the people.
That is, of course, Mr. Agrizi speaking there about the fact that they're going to put pressure on Vernie Peterson via the unions. I'm joined on the line now. Unfortunately, we couldn't get our Skype up by the Reverend Michael Wieder, the Dean of St George's Cathedral in Cape Town. Father Wieder, can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly. Good morning.
Now, we've just listened to Agrizi saying that Vernie Peterson wasn't open to bribery. He came to you one winter's night in 2009 and he was afraid for his life. Tell us what he told you in that meeting, Father.
On that evening, Vernie arrived and he expressed his concern both about the plight of his family and his anxiety about how previous old special branch forces had made common cause with his new colleagues in correctional services. He felt fearful for his life to the extent that there were 3 accompanying bodyguards in 3 different vehicles armed to secure his safety. So he was very clear that it wasn't speculative. He had been threatened, and the evidence of his protection was there on the streets of Roger Street in District 6 the night he visited me.
Now, you've known Vernie for a very long time. You were activists together in many communities, especially Mitchell's Plain.
Yeah.
There's now been a call for an investigation into his death because you basically said that there was a shift in attitude in your article of the usually attentive night nurses when he was ill. And his wife shared that information, and that he could not call for help if needed. Now, we've seen Mr. Bloem calling for an investigation into Vernie's death. Father Wieder, how responsible is Bosasa and those who tried to bribe him for what actually happened to him?
Look, Karima, one must proceed with great caution and yet with some sense of having to understand the broader context in which Bosasa operated. And at the moment, we have the weight of Mr. Agrizi's testimony and then the very clear response on the part of Mr. Dennis Bloem, speaking particularly out of his role as a member then of the majority party.
Yes.
Where he had very conscientiously and very fervently held the weight of accountability before Minister Ngonde Balfour.
Yeah.
So in terms of that and the call that Dennis Bloem is making, I think what has been speculative, and we still, we got to avoid kind of voodoo speculation, but the weight of evidence has been to be secured, but I think there's sufficient grounds to honor his call that an inquiry made into the death, the circumstances, the nature of the post-mortem, and the specifics that June and Rory and Dylan make out of their observation out of the many days. This wasn't just the one day, but they could see a shift in attitude from warmth and support and care to one of hostility and distance.
So are you saying that based on their experiences that Mr. Peterson was actually not safe in that hospital?
He started, it's not only that incident, there has been also in the context of the sense of being insecure
yes.
in the company of the person that used to provide meals for him as an official. And I think that the general climate of conspiracy and suspicion in the department. So it's not just the matter of what happened in the hospital and
yes.
the circumstances, but the broader context. Even when Dennis Bloem speaks about Bosasa, he said it goes beyond
yes.
Bosasa, and he cited other commissioners who need to come and account for themselves.
Absolutely. Now, Linda T has been very central to this. Minister Balfour has also been named as one of the people. Vernie testified in Parliament about the attempts to put pressure on him. When he came to you that night, Father Weather, what was his demeanor like, and did he believe that he will be able to convince those who are higher up that Bosasa is in fact corrupt and that the contract shouldn't be awarded to them?
I think part of Vernie's, at that moment, and it hasn't, I don't want to present him as somebody that was fear-ridden.
Yes.
But he had moments of acute vulnerability, and as a person who had known him since 1980, he felt that he had the confidence of, and my immediate access in the city at that time. There were other colleagues and comrades in Pretoria that he would have confided in, and it's just circumstantial that I was available and free and could understand the context in which he was and out of which he was talking. Mm-hmm. And so he had expressed also, he had gone even to, and these are his words, in terms of reaching out to St Chikani in the presidency.
Yes.
And was then informed that when there's a fight between the DG and or commissioner in his case and the minister always wins.
Yes.
And we know that is the logic of institutions, that's the logic of power positions. But he also embraced Reverend Chikani out of a collegial history of comradeship that predates 1994, and it's in that confidence that he approached the presidency through the person of Reverend Chikani.
Now, of course,
and I think that the lack of support from other senior officials within his department.
Absolutely. Now, that, of course, happened during the time of Thabo Mbeki. Joan, we've seen Bosasa basically oiling the wheels of the different ANC administrations. I mean, this incident in Lindela also happened. The kind of lack of support that Vernie had, the fear that he had. How does this family feel? Do they feel that the government is listening to them? Do they feel that the government is taking the case of their child seriously? Will they return his remains to them so that he can, be buried by his family?
No, the family, they are the custodians of it.
Since 2004, so it's only since this story has come out that they feel that they have any kind of new information. They were even, when their son died, refused to at the hospital, refused to see his body, refused to. They weren't told where he would be buried, and as a result, they still don't know, where he was laid to rest. And this is almost 2 decades afterwards. The father of little Sino Jose, he said that some Home Affairs officials even insinuated that his child was given drugs and that maybe he was kidnapped, and something that just completely freaked them out.
Yeah.
And since then they haven't had any help from the government.
All right, that is Joan from Bhekisisa's Health Institute for Journalism, speaking there about a 4-year-old little boy, South African boy, who was illegally detained, and of course also dealing with the fact that Bosasa got that contract illegally. And I was joined on the telephone by Reverend Michael Weeder, who is the Dean of the Cape Town St George's Cathedral, about the night that Vernie Peterson, who was head of prisons, came to confide in him about his fear for his life. Both are dead. Those are the human costs of state capture. So when we're listening to the testimonies that comes out and the amounts of money, it's important that we don't forget that the whistleblowers, the unfortunate people that were pawns in this process, are also people that we should focus on. Still ahead on The Fix, we take a look at the drama unraveling at the Public Investment Corporation. We are joined by the Deputy Minister of Finance. Do stay with us.